the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a partridge in a pear tree.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Tech Festive Calendar 2021. Freek and I are very honored to be introducing you to the 12 features of Bicep, our Christmas edition. So we all dressed up. And for those of you who do not know me already, my name is Esther Barthel. I've been an IT consultant, mostly focused on end user computing for over 20 years now. Awarded as a Microsoft MVP, started out with more Citrix focused, so also part of the Citrix Technology Professionals program, and very honored to join Freek today, basically in a very special edition of our Bicep Roadshow that we've been having so much fun with this year. So Freek, I guess it's time to introduce yourself.
Yeah, great. So happy to be here, like yourself, for this special Christmas edition. I think it's a great way to sort of close the year with this special Christmas edition of our Bicep roadmap that we've been doing together a lot over the past year. So for those of you who do not know me, my name is Berson. I'm from the Netherlands as well. I'm working at a MSP in the Netherlands, Barthel, primarily focusing on application and desktop delivery technologies. So things like Azure Virtual Desktop, remote desktop services, but also enjoy working a lot with automation, Bicep, infrastructure as code, and all kinds of automation fun. So that's what we're going to do today as well, is take you through a couple of great features that Bicep has to offer. We decided to well, give that a little theme as the Tech Festive is of course into the Christmas theme. So looking forward to this edition, and we're going to see 12 different features that we think are well, a cool way of dealing with Bicep for infrastructure as code. So yeah, Esther, you want to go through and talk about what the first day of Christmas has to offer?
Of course, because on the first day of Christmas, Microsoft sent to me one CLI to create ARM templates, easy as can be. I'm not going to sing. I'm going to reserve that for very special private occasions because I know that's not where my talent lies. But I'm very happy to talk you through the different features of Bicep. To get started with it, Bicep is a domain-specific language, which means that it's also a very declarative language, and that will definitely help us, because that means that I don't have to tell the executable, the CLI, that exactly how to create the resources in Azure. I just have to explain what resources I want to have created in Azure, and then the magic happens by Bicep. One of the other things that you need to know is that Bicep is specifically designed to help you to make life easy in creating ARM templates, because ARM templates are still the core mechanism to tell our Azure Resource Manager how the resources and what resources need to be created within Azure. So that's our core automation system. So once again, Bicep language definitely not there to replace ARM templates, but to make it so much more fun to create those ARM templates and to automate the Azure resource creation for the cloud. So, well, I'm already excited, and because we have so much more features, I guess it's time, Freek, to get started to switch on to the second day and see what the cool features, what Bicep has to offer.
Yeah, let's do that. And I will follow your advice and not start to sing for this the second day of Christmas. But on the second day, Microsoft sent to me a VS Code extension to make the experience rich and comfy. So in this first demo I'm going to see in just a second, we'll build upon some of the examples that Esther just talked about with all of the capabilities that Bicep has. And we'll start by taking a specific look at the VS Code extension that is part of Bicep as well, to really empower you with the authoring experience, with IntelliSense and auto-completion, etc., to make that declarative way of creating your objects and resources in Azure a fun way to do. So let's switch to VS Code and start off a first demo.
Yes, and as a small disclaimer, you are not required to use VS Code to build your Bicep files. But with the Bicep extension, it's going to be so much more fun and easier to create those Bicep files that we definitely recommend it as the easy tool forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me actually show you how it is installed. So a couple of different ways, but probably the most easy way is going to the marketplace within VS Code, searching for Bicep, and from there easily download the latest version of the extension and reload your VS Code, and you are ready to go. So the first example for day 2 we'll see is a couple of examples of well, the VS Code extension in action to help you author your first resource. And that's the first thing we're going to do today as well, is create a storage account using the Bicep language. So we'll start with using the keyword resource, indicating that we're going to create a resource. We need to provide it a symbolic name. For this case, we'll choose STG for storage account. And we'll search for storage account. And as you can see, IntelliSense is already kicking in and providing me a list of possible resources to create based on the typo that I actually did here in the name. But it indicated a couple of things, including the storage account. So I hit enter here. And the next thing that I'm provided with is all of the API versions for this storage account. So let's just select the latest one. I can do an equal sign and a couple of brackets. So the first thing you'll notice is that the declaration of the resource, including the API, is just a single string, and we'll see a couple of examples on how that is different in the JSON or ARM template language as we start to transpile these files into JSON. But the first thing we need to do now is provide a couple of parameters. So, and in the meantime, my VS Code actually crashed.
Wow.
Wow, that never happens.
See, it's just very special edition.
There we go. You can tell this is a live demo, right? So let's start with the name, and let's just call it, well, since we are in the festive season, let's call it Santa. And for the location we need to provide, so this is the location where the storage account is going to be created. We'll choose West Europe, because that's the location where we are currently. We need to define a storage account kind, so we'll do storage v2 in this case. We need to define a SKU. That's going to be multiple properties, but at least provide a name. And let's choose standard LRS for now. So as you can see, there was a lot of IntelliSense helping me along with the creation of these objects by providing all kinds of values during the creation. Super easy to create these objects. And what's also great about Bicep is that I'm able to reference existing or previously declared resources as well. So let me give you an example. If I would create an output, so indicating that I want to create an output as part of this template deployment, I will choose the keyword output followed by a symbolic name, followed by the type, and then an equal sign. And now we'll actually type STG, so referencing the STG symbolic name that we had before. And we want, in this case, do the properties, do the primary endpoint, and collect, in this case, the blob. And that's it. So the IntelliSense helped me along the way with all of those dot completion steps in there to define what I can have as an output of this template. The thing I want to show you is actually customizing it a little bit to make it more reusable. So let's introduce a couple of parameters. And as you can see, the IntelliSense again is kicking in with providing me with all kinds of objects, including the parameter type in this case, which is going to be a string. And we'll also add a default value. I'm just going to copy and paste that in, which is Santa. And then let's create another parameter, which is called the STG location, which is also a string, and it's going to be equal to what we have defined before, West Europe. So now what we can do is we can copy these parameter files and replace them inside our resource declaration. And that allows us to pass the storage account name and the location which probably should have been not West Europe in case of center, but somewhere on, what is it, North Pole? I don't know.
North Pole.
North
Yeah.
Pole. Not sure if there's an Azure data center region there, but we'll see. But this even eventually allows us to change the parameters upon the deployment of this template.
And what I really like is that you can just type in the parameter name, so you don't have to include it in special brackets or bracelets or whatever the correct terminologies are. So
yeah, I
that
totally
makes
agree.
it very easy.
Yeah, and also if you would like hover over these files, you can actually see that it is a parameter with a type, etc. And of course, I can just see it here, but imagine a longer bicep file. I don't have to scroll all the way back and forth, just hover over it and see what kind of parameter it is, just like that. So before we go to the day number 3 as the feature, the last thing I want to show you is actually transpiling this. And in order to do that, let me switch to the correct folder and do a bicep build, and then the name of the file, which is main.bicep. And as you can see, left-hand side, what is going to happen is now I get the JSON equivalent. So let's open it up side by side. And you can probably already tell the difference in complexity, left-hand side versus right. So I'm sure that you are also, much more into the bicep language in terms of the easiness to create and author and read this, compared to a lot of complexity overhead with the JSON file with, like Esther mentioned, the brackets and the semicolons and the commas, etc. going on. So especially if you take a look at, for example, this output example, this is just, super easy without any brackets or commas, etc. Here we're using a reference function, a resource ID function, and we're concatenating all kinds of stuff, all kinds of voodoo magic in order to create that output. Whereas in Bicep, it's super easy to do.
Yeah, for me at least, Bicep feels more intuitive in creating the code. And I just love that I know that the transpiling process will take care of all the complexity and the syntax correctness of my ARM template. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm super excited about Bicep.
Yep. Yeah, and the fun thing is, and we'll get into more demos along the way as well, is I can also just transpile this by doing a right click here. So I don't have to do the command line. I can just right click here and say build, and the JSON equivalent will be created for me. So just a couple of examples of how the extension really helps us to define these resources and get started with Bicep. And we'll see much more examples as we go into more advanced scenarios in the other demos. So switching back to the slide deck, I think that you are going to share your screen now, right?
Yeah, I will, because I guess it's time for the 3rd day of Christmas.
Yes.
Just making sure that I select the right one. There we go. So on the 3rd day of Christmas, Microsoft sent to me scaffolding and code snippets, which are very tasty. So what do we mean by that? I'm just gonna quickly give you a heads up on what scaffolding means, because for me that was a very new term, and that could be because I'm not a native English speaker. But scaffolding means that basically the Bicep extension in VS Code helps me in understanding what the required properties are. So it's making my life even more easier than what you just saw Freek demo in just a second ago. So here we already have an example Bicep file, but just to show you how easy the scaffolding is, I'm just quickly gonna use, hang on, storage is easier to get to that version. So storage account, but what I mean is when scaffolding kicks in, is that we now have this option called required properties. And if I click on that, I already get all the properties that are required. So that means the resource creation can take place without any errors right there. And I can just easily, once again, let's call it, well, maybe not Santa. I'm more a Rudolph kind of person. You can just use tab to go to the next required property. So I still have to understand how to do all the parameters to be fully honest. And with the control space, and that's why I also love VS Code and extensions. I can easily find the right name for that next property. Once again, use tab to jump to the next one, and easy as that. I created another resource.
Control space is definitely your friend in in creating these resources for sure.
Definitely. And then, of course, I said something else because basically we're adding 2 features into this third day. So it's not just the scaffolding that makes it easy to at least have those required properties up and ready to go, but we also have something else called snippets that definitely make life very easy as well. And I'm quickly gonna see if I think it's still Windows Virtual Desktop. If I can get something that I know Freek edited for us as well. And I do apologize for all the additional error messages that you're showing. Unfortunately, fortunately, I signed up for GitHub Pilot, so it's helping me already create better code. So just ignore all the red marks because we will definitely fill it in. But what you see, let's focus back on the snippets. What you see here is that I already have not just with the scaffolding those minimum required properties, but I also have the full code already put out there for me. And all I have to do is just add or make some changes to the naming that are like default names within the snippet. So this is one of the snippets that I know Freek added to the repository. So thank you for that, because that once again makes life very easy and coding a lot of fun.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of community people from the community also contributing to this list of snippets. So if you are looking for a specific snippet and it's not there, feel free to add that in and send in a pull request for it. So the product team is definitely looking forward and welcoming you to contribute to that. And they also have an option to do these things for multiple resources as well. So creating multiple resources with a single snippet. So definitely another great feature to help you in the authoring of Bicep.
So I guess it's time to go on to the next day.
Yeah, let me go ahead and re-share my screen. So it is the 4th day of Christmas, and on that day, Microsoft sent to us Linter checks that are very nifty. So Linter is being used to allow you to examine your code and make sure you're compliant to Microsoft standards or even your own standards that you have within your company or within your organization. So besides all of the cool features that we've seen with Linter and scaffolding and code completion, etc., this is really meant to examine your code to see if you made any errors or changes or things that are not compliant to your own standards that you have within your organization. So once again, let's switch to VS Code to see some of that in action on day number 4. So we have a couple of files here. The first thing we'll start with is it's a main.bicep file. I already went ahead and prepared that. So you see the same storage account declaration that we had before, this time also not having a hard-coded location, but using the resource group function to actually retrieve the location of the resource group where we are deploying this. To give you an example, that all of the functions that we had in ARM templates, like this function or like the subscription function or whatever, also work in Bicep to easily retrieve, in this case, the location of the resource group. But the thing we want to look at is Linter. And as you can see, I have 2 nice curly brackets here, which are, by the way, almost in Christmas style as well with the colors. But I have 2 of them here. So the first one is actually telling me that the Santa password, the parameter, is never used. Is declared but never used within the template, right? So it found out that I'm not using this as a parameter, which also basic check. But there's another one here that's actually red, so there's an error, and that says secure parameters should not have hard-coded default values, which is of course true because this value will could end up in all kinds of places. And as you can see, it's a very secure password in this case. So even though I added the secure parameters, and we'll talk about parameters in some of the upcoming days as well, this is still not a common practice. So where is this coming from? If I go to a file called bicepconfig.json, we have a couple of rules defined here, as you can see. So we have rules for using environment URLs, for unused parameters, unused variables, incorrect uses of string interpolation. And in this case, we tripped over the secure parameter by default. And as you can see, it is now stated into or as set as a level error. So what that means is if I would try to transpile this, and let me just remove this JSON here so that you know that I'm not cheating. If I transpile this or try to transpile it, I will probably get an error here saying that secure parameters should not have hard-coded values, so it will not transpile this for me. If I would change that, or if I would decide, well, it's not really an error, let's make just a warning instead, and then do that same transpile action again. Building it, that will actually complete, because now I only have a warning, so a yellow curly bracket in this case, and still allow me to transpile. So just to give you an example of a couple of rules you can set in order to make sure that all of your templates are following your own standard. Especially if you're doing things like with DevOps or automated pipelines, etc., you can have the pipelines actually trip over this because, the bicep file will not transpile into a JSON and will never be successful as part of your pipeline, for example. So that was an example of using Linter, and there's a lot more Linter rules, as you can see. We'll not discuss those. And as a small teaser, it's also called a module alias within the same file. We'll touch on that, I think, on day number 12, as we discuss modules and the private registry. But for now, remember that you can use the bicepconfig.json file to make sure that you have the linter rules in there. And it will search actively for JSON files within the folder, or even go up to other subfolders within the tree to find out if there's a bicep config file that you are using. So definitely a great feature to use as part of the overall authoring experience to improve the quality of your code. So, day number 5.
Yes. Let me quickly switch screens again so I can show you all the magic. So on the 5th day of Christmas, Microsoft sent to me parameter decorators that make you feel almighty. I love how you have all these powerful words in there, Freek, because
I know, right?
I think it's a good representation of the passion that we have for Bicep. So
Definitely.
let's dive into parameter decorators. Let me quickly remove that one. I already prepared a quick example with some of the different parameter decorators. And I think Freek already sneaked in one in his linter examples, which is perfect. Definitely love that one as well. And just to make sure that it was a little bit less red screaming text in my screen, I made sure that I turned off some of the cool linter warnings. Once again, getting back to the parameter decorators. So what we can do is we can specify different types or additions to our parameters, make them more dynamic and make them more functional within our code. So starting with the @ sign, in this case, the decorator is to ensure that Bicep understands that this is a secure string. So I don't have to make this a type of secure string. Let me see if I can quickly. So I don't have to select secure string. In this case, I'm using the decorator to make it easier to just have that secure string. And of course, that super secret password, we better just remove that one to be a bit more secure and to make sure that we're not giving away all the secrets out there. And there are cool other decorators as well. As you can see, I already used the allowed one because I just love how also in ARM templates you can specify pre-select values for your parameters. And with the allow decorator, we can also do that. So this allows me to just get that select list or allowed input, allowed values for my parameter. And even as you can see, I can still specify a default value. So that means that if I run this code in an automated way, do not have a more interaction with it, or maybe forgot to specify this parameter, I still have that option to make sure that the default value is picked, even though you do have more options. And as you can see, it can be an extended list for whatever reason. So I guess we have another fun day of bicep coding ahead of us.
Yeah, and what I also like about the allowed feature is that if you would turn this template into like a template specification or a template object within the Azure portal, you would deploy it from there, you'll actually get a nice drop-down list, allowing in this case to select breadth mode or depth mode as the load balancing mode. So definitely also helpful if you are using template specifications or other objects in the Azure portal to use these allowed values for sure.
Yeah, that makes it easy while you're testing your automation.
Yep.
Because of course we are more focused on the CLI in our case than the GUI, but that's just a personal preference.
Cool. So switching screens again, and let's take a look at day number 6. So on day number 6, Microsoft gave to me a conditional deployment that is very snappy. So conditional deployments are definitely great. What they allow you to do is provide a condition on the, in this case, resource declaration. So in some scenarios, you might only want to deploy a specific resource if it makes sense. So if a specific condition is met in that case. So let me switch to VS Code again and take a look at the example code of day number 6. And this is already starting to be a fairly large bicep file, but there's a couple of things I want to show you specifically. So we'll go over the other stuff that will be shown in other days. Let's focus on the conditionals. So I have a couple of Boolean values here. And let me show you what they look like inside the code. So scrolling all the way down, in this case, let me just give you a couple of thoughts on what we're creating here. We're creating a couple of virtual machines with extensions. We're doing a couple of things on that virtual machine, joining it to the domain and all kinds of other stuff. But the thing I want to mention is the conditional deployment in this case for installing drivers. So in this case, it's the Azure Virtual Desktop scenario where I'm deploying virtual machines towards the Azure portal. And for some of those virtual machines, you might be leveraging a GPU, either by NVIDIA or by AMD. And you want to use the extension, the VM extension on top of that in order to download and install the driver for that. But you probably want to always only do that if it is actually a GPU-enabled machine. So in that case, I have the resource declaration here. So the keyword, the symbolic name, the name of the resource. In this case, it's an extension. For looping, we're not going to touch on that. It's going to be in one of the next upcoming days. But here is that conditional. So in this case, I say that this resource only needs to be created. So this extension only needs to be deployed if GPU type, and GPU type is a parameter. So not a Boolean that I mentioned before. In this case, it's actually a string. It can either be AMD, non, or NVIDIA. So in case you specify GPU type NVIDIA, as it states here, the driver will actually be installed. So selecting the type and the version, this extension will make sure that the driver will be installed for your NVIDIA machine. And similar, we can do the same thing, of course, you probably guessed it, with AMD. So if GPU type is set to AMD, this extension will be run installing the AMD GPU driver. So in this case, we used it for an extension, but you can also use it for other resources like a virtual machine or a network adapter or a storage account, or maybe you want to base the storage account type based on a specific condition, etc., which allow you to make well, reusable templates based on these conditional statements. So that was day number 6. And let's move on to the next.
Yes, so on the 7th day of Christmas, Microsoft sent to me existing keywords that are like candy. And I'm just gonna leave this screen open, Freek, because I think you already zoomed in on what part of the code we can use existing keyword. Basically, what you need to realize is that for Bicep, Azure is the state indeed. And if we are declaring what resources we want, it's usually to create new resources. So with the existing keyword, we can make sure that Bicep understands, and even the Azure Resource Manager understands, that this resource already exists in Azure. So there's no need to create it. We just want to make sure that we can reference it, or maybe even update specific properties of that resource. So that's to make sure that Bicep and the Azure Resource Manager understands that we are referencing an existing resource. We can simply add that word to our code and just say before the is the is sign, make sure that you put in existing, and then that's the magic that makes your Azure Resource Manager understand, whoa, wait a minute, I'm not gonna create new resources for this and throw maybe a couple of errors because the resources are already there. No, this is just to reference and to use this, reuse this in our Bicep code, because well, as you can see with this key fold example, you just want to make sure that you can reach that existing key fold and retrieve your secrets in a safe and secure manner. So once again, another great feature of Bicep, and we're getting closer to Christmas.
Yeah. All right. So on day number 8, Microsoft sent to me module keywords that are very treasury. So modules is, of course, a big aspect, a very big feature of the Bicep language, essentially allowing you to extract pieces of code, extract resource declarations, put them into separate module, of course, to make sure that these things are, well, improve the reusability of these templates, to use all kinds of modules and submodules in order to have those resource declarations be in separate files. So let me switch to VS Code and show you an example. So we are in day number, what is it? 8, right?
Yes, sorry.
Day number 8. So this is, I have a couple of files. Here I have one main.bicep file, and I have a couple of module files, as the name implies. So let's take a look at what that means. So I have a couple of resource declarations here. So I have a resource group that I'm created. And again, you can see this conditional here. In this case, it is a Boolean, so only deploying it if this Boolean is set to true. But here I have another keyword, which is actually module, followed by a symbolic name, and then followed by a file name. So this is actually referencing a local file called 9.vnet-module.bicep. This is a separate file, as you can see on the left-hand side, and I specify the scope. So this is the resource group that I'm deploying this to by specifying the symbolic name of the resource group. I give it a name, and I pass it a couple of parameters. So in this case, I'm collecting parameters in my main file and then passing them on, in this case, to a module file. So opening up that module file, let's do the VNet in this case. This is just another Bicep file. So there's nothing different between a module file and a Bicep file. Any Bicep file can be a module, and it can also be a main file. So I could go ahead and right-click here and choose build to have this separate file be built. But in this case, I'm using it from within the main file. So as you can see, this is just another Bicep file. So in this case, we're creating a VNet as the resource, and in this case, also including a subnet. So this allows me to have a single main.file and use well, a subset of my repository of different module files that maybe have been created over the past in order to do a deployment for multiple resources into multiple resource groups as well. One thing you need to be aware of is that once you start deploying resources to multiple resource groups, then you need to change the target scope. So as you can see, the target scope is the first thing we define here. If you're not familiar with target scopes, this allows us to define what is the scope that we're deploying to. So by default, you're deploying into a single resource group, but in this case, I want to deploy modules that are coming from different module files and deploy them into multiple resource groups. We can change the target scope to, sorry, not resource group, to subscription in order to have different resource groups be used as part of this deployment. So these are module files, and the cool thing is if I would transpile this main.file, select build here, of course the result is going to be a JSON file. That should be no surprise anymore, but it's actually a combined JSON file of all of the module files as well, and that is the reason why it just became over 400 lines of code.
You just love doing that.
I love doing that. And that is because all of the resource declarations from all of the modules are now into this single JSON file. So I could feed this into the ARM engine using DevOps or using PowerShell or whatever I'm using, and have all of these resources be deployed without, again, having to worry about all of this complex syntax that is in here.
And I guess it also makes it easier to create templates for different resources that you probably create in multiple different scenarios. So you can still have that template file, that one module, and reuse it with different scenarios to make sure that all your resources are created in Azure.
Yep. Yeah, and the modules is definitely something that you can distribute to your coworkers or your colleagues if you're working with similar projects. So store them in a central location. We'll cover that feature in an upcoming day, but definitely allow you to reuse the code and have other coworkers use your modules to deploy something. And by the way, what you can also do is if you have existing JSON templates, like here I have on the left-hand side an old school template.json, I can use that JSON file as a module within Bicep. So in order to do that, what I would do is, to give you an example, I would type a module here. I would say, give it a name, old school, and I would just point to the existing JSON template. And similar to the stuff that Esther just showed you, this also has the scaffolding for the required properties. So I can now just enter in the scope, like the resource group. I can provide it a name, and in this case, a varied password along the way. So this also allows you, if you're coming from an ARM template background, to have a lot of ARM templates in your repository of all the stuff that you created before. You don't have to, well, change those into Bicep files. You can also just use your JSON files as a module file and treat them similar to other module files. So definitely great if you have a lot of existing JSON templates or downloaded it from repositories or the Azure Marketplace, for example.
Awesome.
Cool. So,
yeah, and with that,
day number 9.
Just quickly switch to day number 9. On the 9th day of Christmas, Microsoft sent to me loops that are extraordinary. I wasn't sure if I pronounced that correctly, but it definitely rhymes, so we're going to stick with it. So what we're talking about is the ability to create loops or use loops, like the for loop that is already shown in this example. And if I quickly switch back to VS Code, because we obviously prepared some cool demo features, is what you can see in this case is that I can easily specify the number of virtual machines that I want to have as part of a session host within Azure Virtual Desktops. And I definitely want just one template or one command to create those 5 virtual machines that I specified with this parameter. In order to do that, I use that for loop within the Bicep code. So that means I only, in this case, have to specify the virtual NIC just once. With the name, with the location, and all the properties, but by using the 4i in range. So it goes from 1 to the number of VMs, which is 5 in this case, linking it back to the parameter, making it flexible, because if I use this with different parameter input, then I can create 10, maybe even 15 or 25 if I feel very festive and want to have a huge party of virtual desktops. So back to that for loop, it enables me to use more granular variables. And as you can see, I already specified the I variable to make sure that each virtual NIC also gets a unique name. So that prevents me from accidentally introducing errors into my code. So it does take a bit more of closely monitoring the code that you create, but well, coming from a PowerShell background and being a scripter, I really love the fact that I have now the option to add also loops into my code. So that's day 9.
Cool. So
almost there.
Almost there. Let's transition
What's more in store for us?
Day number 10. So on the 10th day of Christmas, Microsoft sent to me Decompiling, which is wickedly. So Decompiling we already briefly touched on it in one of the previous days, is allowing you to take existing JSON files and bring them back to Bicep. So the previous example we showed in the module section allows you to use a JSON file and treat it as a module file. But for some scenarios, you might have JSON files and want to actually decompile or detranspile or whatever you want to call it back to Bicep. And you actually can do that. So it's a very brief demo, but just let me show you how that works in action. So I have an existing JSON file here. So this is our, the usual JSON with all of the syntax overhead, as you can see. And in this case, it deploys another host pool environment. We all love Azure Virtual Desktop, apparently. So deploying host pools, application groups, and workspaces. So what I could do is if I would go to the correct day, number 10, to a Bicep decompile, and then the name of the file pointing to the JSON file. And in this case, it actually transpiled it left-hand side into a Bicep file. Now, of course, it did mention that decompiling is always a best effort process. So you will sometimes run into very specific JSON-only things that are not decompilable, if that's the word. So always make sure to check your Bicep files after you have done that decompile. But if I open it up, here is the JSON equivalent of what we just saw with all of the resource declarations, the parameters, the default values, etc. So some of the things that we did notice is that, for example, the name of the symbolic name in this case, it's, well, not maybe something you want to have because symbolic names are not something that's used in JSON. So it's a little bit hard to decompile that, of course. But you can easily just change that to, for example, to HP. Instead of having that large name with the underscore in there. But other than that, this is really helpful if you have a lot of existing JSON templates, or if you downloaded a JSON file from the Azure portal, which you can do once you are deploying something in the UI. Sometimes you download the JSON code to do some reverse engineering to see what's in there. This actually allows you to decompile that entire JSON file back to Bicep. And then from that moment on, have Bicep as the starting point. So another great tool, I would say, in the toolbox of Bicep on this day number 10. Switching to 11.
Yeah, let me share my screen again. So on the 11th day of Christmas, Microsoft sent to me a visualizer that is very snappy. Just making sure that I stick to the themes. I just love your creativeness, Freek. Just have to give you a compliment on that one. And definitely the credits. So just to make sure that I'm not postponing too much of the fun, let's show you the visualizer, because this is another awesome feature. So in this case, we already prepared another nice Bicep files, and it already has some additional resources, but also references to modules. So easy as that, I can just right click on the file, say open visualizer, and look at that. I have a cool image that is very dynamic as well. So it's not just quickly create a screenshot and just add that to my documentation or the wiki pages that I'm building to make sure that I accompany my Bicep files with it. But this also, as you can see, includes references to the modules. So that makes it even more dynamic. So if I, for instance, might change some of the modules, what the hell, I can just easily remove just one of the descriptions. Why not? No, that would be too much. Well, in this case, let's just remove, and I know it will probably generate errors as well. But what you see, if I switch back to the visualizer, you see that it already removed the reference to that module. So let me quickly restore that just to make sure that Freek doesn't give me a bad eye.
Yeah, I love how
It's
dynamic that
it's
is.
still all there,
That's
Freek.
great.
It's still all there. No worries.
I
I
love how
fixed it again.
I love how dynamic that actually is while you're typing code. So even if you're doing this side by side, for example, you could see the resources be popping up as you are typing in your Bicep script. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I definitely love having some visual confirmation of all the coding that I'm doing.
For
So
sure.
even though I definitely moved away from GUIs and loved doing everything in code, it's still very nice to have that visual quick reference to double check if you didn't forget anything or if you created some weird looping references, stuff like that.
Yep.
So another great feature to keep in check when you start diving into Bicep.
Cool. So on to the last day. Day number 12. And on day number 12, and at this point we probably ran out of rhymes, Microsoft sent to me a private module registry. So that happened through rhyme as well. But this is one of the latest features that Microsoft introduced as part of Bicep, the private registry module capability. So we already touched on modules in one of the previous days, which allowed you to extract pieces of code, put them into separate module files, and reuse them within your main template, for example. In all of those scenarios, all of the Bicep files had to be on your local file system, which of course is, well, not ideal if you're sharing that code. You have to store them somewhere else in order for colleagues to use them as well. The registry allows you to have these modules inside Azure, inside an Azure container registry, and use them and point to those online resources in order to have those modules be used.
And I guess this is a highly requested feature from, well, I think the last couple of months that the Bicep team so quickly realized and will make our life a lot easier because, yeah, it's great to from an automated perspective that we have the repository with all our modules and keep copying back and forth. But I definitely love the ability to use that registry.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it was a big demanded feature, and it's great to see the first version. There's going to be another editions as well. So this is the private registry module to allow you to reuse them and share them amongst your colleagues within the same organization. The next step, but that's not something we can show yet, is a public registry model, which also allows you to start using the code of other people in a public registry that's available to everyone. So definitely also looking forward to that one. So let me show you the VS Code example of this day number 12. I have a couple of files here. I have a main.bicep file, which is our main file in which we collect the parameters and create a couple of resources. So in this case, I'm creating another resource group. I'm doing that in a condition as well. And as you can see here, I have another module declaration. So in this case, as you can see, I still have the keyword module, I still have the symbolic name, but there's some descriptive thing here called BR column, which is the Bicep registry. So this is pointing not to a local file, not to a local module file, but this is an online location of an Azure container registry that contains my Bicep file. So once I type this in, and I type in the module and the symbolic name, and I type in this address, what actually happens in the background is that based on the CLI credentials that are part of that are logged into the VS Code, it will download a cached copy of that file and start using it as a module on your local file system. So without having to explicitly have that file locally, I can just point to this online location. And for the rest, that is exactly the same declaration. So with the name, the scope, the parameters, etc. The only thing that changes is actually the location where that Bicep module is coming from. So in this case, let me show you how that file actually ended up there. So let's open up this demo PS1 example. This is the AZ CLI command that's used to create a new ACR in a specific resource group with a specific Bicep file. So this creates that, and then once I do that publish command, I can actually publish, in this case, a Bicep file towards this location with eventually a version number as well, and that will make sure to upload the Bicep file into our ACR and have that available to use. And once you have it there, you can have your RBAC permissions on the ACR to include or exclude people who can download and use that as a module.
Yeah, and it is indeed a very secure solution, as I can comment on that, because I tried to use Freek's code and it immediately threw some errors on something saying wrong or not authenticated, I guess. So yeah,
Yep.
it immediately punished me. I definitely have to create my own registry for this one.
Yeah, I'll make sure to add you as an RBAC role so you can actually start using the modules. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that this is, of course, a very long name, as you can see, with well, the entire URL here with all the subfolders, etc. What you can also do is use these shortened names. So this is the same module, but then in a shorter path. And that is coming from the Bicep config file we had before with the Linter configuration. I gave you a quick sneak peek on what's in there. It's called the module aliases. And as you can see, there's a Bicep registry here, and this is the place where I've defined the location. So from that moment on, what I'm able to do inside my main.bicep file is just reference that name without having the entire URL, etc., as specified here. So that makes it easier to reference these modules with the aliases. And the other thing you saw in this configuration file is also the credential precedence. So I can say this: I want to have PowerShell as the first authentication, and then Azure CLI as the second. So in that case, the credentials within my VS Code are used to download the modules and start using them in Bicep. So that is the private registry, and as we mentioned, the next step is, of course, that the public registry will also become available, allowing you to also share your code with the community or with the entire world, basically, because they become public for everyone to use, similar to the code snippets that Esther also showed you as a way to share each other's code and well, build upon stuff that other people have created before. So that was the last day of Christmas. And
that means that this fun is gonna quickly come to an end, Freek.
I guess so, yeah. So this is the summary of what we have seen before. So we'll not try to sing this out, but just in case you want to do it yourself, feel free, or do let us know if it rhymed correctly. But we saw some fun stuff with the VS Code extension, the scaffolding, the snippets, the linter checks, well, all of the stuff that you see on the screen right now. So hopefully you enjoyed the 12 features that we selected for the 12 days.
Yeah, and you are just as excited as we are on adapting Bicep and having some holiday fun.
Yeah, exactly. So Last thing I want to share, and then we'll let you go, is the roadmap of all of the Bicep features. So a lot of the stuff that we show you today is actually on this slide, and this indicates where all of those features were introduced in the different versions. And we're very close to getting an 1.0 version of the Bicep with all of the latest features in here. So just leaving this as well, something to check out later if you're interested into what the roadmap was in the future and what it is going to be in the upcoming future.
Awesome. And then I guess there's always that last call to action that we definitely want to get in there, because it's not us just being excited about it. The Bicep team itself is so much looking forward to feedback, getting new ideas, even the snippets. If you have an update of an existing snippet, or if you feel like some of the snippets or pieces of code that you regularly use are missing, feel free to add them and to contribute to this awesome community that is all about sharing knowledge, sharing experience, to make our all experience awesome. First of all, as you can see, aka.ms/bicep. That's where you find all the documentation, and it has detailed information on all the features that we already discussed. So if you feel like we went too fast, which I don't think was the case, but feel free to just check that out, have that reference ready for you during all your own Bicep adventures.
Cool. Yeah, and the last thing is the Learn Bicep URL, which contains a lot of modules, a lot of introductional paths towards learning Bicep as well. So a lot of interactive ways of well, catching up with all the Bicep features that we discussed in the session today. Get some hands-on experience and start learning it using these great learning paths. They're continuously adding new modules to it as well. So I think this is already an outdated slide, but there's a lot of modules that have been added in the past as well, in order to get started with Bicep. That was it. I think the last slide. We made it.
Yes. So thanks all. And really enjoy your holidays, be with family, make the best out of these challenging times, to be social, to interact, and to make sure that we have all these cool resolutions for 2022 as well. Hope to see you there, and hope to share lots more of fun with you all.
Yep. Thank you for joining, and happy holidays, everyone. See you.
Bye.
On the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a partridge in a pear tree.
On the second day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 2 turtle doves
And a partridge in a pear tree.